Mongolian Empire swept across continents, unmatched in power, changing the course of history forever. At its heart was a man once known as Genghis. He was a warrior, a strategist, a visionary. He united the rival houses on the vast Mongolian steppe into one great and powerful nation.
The world changed with his actions. It could not go back to the way it was before Genghis Khan.
He crushed every empire that dared stand in his path.
He conquered more territory than any other single ruler in history.
The vast and desolate Mongolian plains are home to nomadic rulers whose people thrive in these barren lands, moving over distant pastures to sustain their families and herds. These people are skilled horse riders, expert archers, and masters of this unique landscape, known as the steppes.
So the steppe lands is an enormous belt of grassland that runs all the way from the Manchurian forests right across the Eurasian continent as far as the Hungarian plains in the west.
Imagine a young boy named Temujin, born into the harsh Mongolian steppe, facing constant threats from rival tribes and struggling to survive. How did this boy grow up to become Genghis Khan, the founder of the largest contiguous empire in history? At its peak, the Mongol Empire covered 16% of the Earth's total land area. That's larger than any empire before. The rise of Temujin. Temujin's early life was shaped by the harsh realities of the Mongolian steppe. Born around 1162, he faced a childhood marked by hardship and struggle. The turning point in Temujin's life came when he was just 9 years old. His father, Yasuge, was poisoned by a rival tribe, leaving the family vulnerable. In the wake of this tragedy, Temujin's father's allies abandoned them, seeing no value in supporting a widow and her young children. The betrayal forced Temujin, his mother Holun, and his siblings into a life of poverty and exile. Life as an outcast was brutal. Temujin and his family subsisted on small animals, wild fruits, and roots. They faced constant threats from other tribes and even from within their own clan.
The young Temujin, born a noble prince, is now reduced to poverty. His family must fight for survival on the harsh Mongolian steppe. The family struggles for several years in the unforgiving landscape. As Temujin and his brothers grow older and mature, they learn to hunt and catch fish to support their mother. After years of abandonment and isolation, tensions grow between Temujin and his older half-brother, Bektar.
Temujin and his brother Khazar quarrel with the half-brothers, the sons of a secondary wife of their dead father. The two sets of boys quarrel over apparently a fish. They get their bows. Khazar, one of Temujin's brothers, comes up from the front and approaches Bektar, who's on the top of a hill. Temujin, meanwhile, is sneaking up from behind.
He was shot in a most cowardly way.
Surrounding this poor half-brother and shooting him in the back as well as the front.
When Temujin's mother, Holun, learns of Bektar's death, she is distraught. She confronts Temujin, questioning how he could turn against his own brother.
Flees away.
Temujin hid for 9 days.
Time passes, he's got nothing to eat. They finally arrest him take him away to punish him.
One of the most defining moments of Temujin's youth came when he was captured and enslaved by a rival tribe. Showing the resourcefulness and determination that would become his hallmarks, Temujin managed to escape.
He is eventually reunited with his mother and his brothers. Years pass, and Temujin works tirelessly to rebuild the kingdom that was lost after his father's death.
Uniting the Mongol tribes. Temujin's first step toward unification was to rally support from smaller tribes. He recognized that building a power base required more than just military might. It demanded strategic alliances and diplomatic finesse. As Temujin's influence grew, he faced resistance from larger tribal confederations. The Merkits and Tatars, long-standing rivals of Temujin's tribe, posed significant threats. Temujin met these challenges head-on, engaging in a series of battles that would test his military acumen and leadership skills. These victories not only expanded Temujin's territory, but also demonstrated his capability as a military leader, attracting more followers to his cause. The culmination of Temujin's unification efforts came in 1206 at the Grand Kurultai, or Tribal Council. Here, representatives from various Mongol tribes gathered to decide the future of their people. In a historic moment, Temujin was declared Genghis Khan, which roughly translates to universal ruler or oceanic leader. With his position secure, Genghis Khan set about implementing laws and social reforms to stabilize Mongol society.
He established a universal code of law, known as the Yasa, applicable to every subject within his growing domain. It strictly banned the kidnapping of women, and most surprisingly of all, guaranteed religious freedom to every person living under Mongol rule.
Western chroniclers who witnessed the Mongol invasions often dismissed the Mongol horses as inferior beasts, small, shaggy, ugly creatures that looked more like oversized ponies than proper war horses. Compared to the massive European destriers or the sleek Arabian stallions, the Mongolian horse seemed laughably inadequate. They stood only 12 to 14 hands high, barely reaching the shoulder of a tall man. They had thick, heavy coats, short legs, and large heads that gave them an ungainly appearance. The Mongolian horse was the product of thousands of years of natural selection in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The horses that survived in this environment were the toughest animals on the planet, and the Mongols had been breeding them for warfare since before recorded history began. These horses could survive on vegetation that would starve European war horses to death. They didn't need grain or prepared feed. They could paw through snow to reach frozen grass, eat bark from trees, and thrive on the sparse vegetation of the steppes. This meant Mongol armies didn't need massive supply trains of fodder following behind them. The horses fed themselves by grazing during rest periods and overnight stops. The construction of a Mongol composite bow was a year-long process requiring master craftsmanship. The belly of the bow was constructed from horn, typically water buffalo horn or ibex horn, which resisted compression. The back of the bow was made from sinew, usually from deer or cattle, which excelled at handling tension. Between these layers was a core of flexible wood, usually birch or bamboo. These materials were laminated together using fish glue, then wrapped in birch bark or leather to protect the bow from moisture, and the entire construction was left to cure for at least a year, sometimes longer. A fully trained Mongol archer carried multiple quivers, typically holding 60 arrows each, giving him 120 to 180 arrows readily available. The arrows themselves were specialized for different purposes. Light arrows with small, sharp heads were used for long-range harassment. Heavy arrows with broad, barbed heads were designed to punch through armor and create devastating wounds. Whistling arrows with perforated bulbs behind the points created distinctive screaming sounds used for signaling commands across the battlefield. Power meant nothing without accuracy, and this is where Mongol training created warriors who seemed superhuman to their enemies. Archery training began in early childhood, around age 3 or 4, as soon as a child had the strength to pull a small bow. By age 6 or 7, they were shooting from horseback at walking speed, learning to time their shots with the horse's gait. By age 10, they were shooting at full gallop, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization with the animal beneath them. A boy who wanted to become a warrior needed to hit targets consistently while riding at full speed. He had to control his horse entirely with his legs and weight distribution, since both hands were occupied with the bow. He had to time his shot for the moment when all 4 of the horse's hooves were off the ground, the only instant during a gallop when the horse's motion was smooth enough for an accurate shot. He had to compensate for wind, for the speed of his horse, for the movement of his target, and for the arc of the arrow, all while riding at 30 miles per hour across rough terrain.
Genghis Khan also reorganized the military, making the Mongol army a formidable fighting force.
He abolished the old tribal clan system entirely and reorganized the entire army. Loyalty now flowed not to a bloodline or a clan elder, but directly to the unit, to the commander, and ultimately to the Khan himself. Discipline within this new army was absolute and unforgiving. If a single soldier within a unit of 10 fled the battlefield in cowardice, all 9 of his remaining comrades were executed, regardless of their own conduct in the fight.
At the heart of their success was the use of highly mobile cavalry units, emphasizing speed, maneuverability, and effective communication. Genghis Khan also recognized the power of psychological warfare. The Mongols would often spread fear and propaganda to weaken enemy morale before battles. This strategy often led to cities surrendering without a fight.
One of the most psychologically devastating Mongol tactics was their systematic use of captured civilians as human shields during sieges. The tactic served multiple brutal purposes simultaneously. It provided cover for Mongol assault troops, it demoralized defenders, it exhausted enemy ammunition, and it inflicted psychological trauma that undermined resistance. The process was methodical. When the Mongols approached a fortified city, they would first conquer the surrounding towns and villages, capturing the civilian population. These prisoners would be driven ahead of the Mongol army to the target city, where they were forced to fill in moats, construct siege equipment, and carry supplies under fire from the city's defenders. As the siege progressed and the Mongols prepared to assault the walls, these civilians would be driven forward ahead of the attacking troops, forced to climb siege ladders and approach the walls under arrow fire. The defenders faced an impossible moral choice: kill their own people, possibly their own relatives, neighbors, and friends, or allow them to reach the walls where Mongol troops would use them as cover for the assault. By forcing civilians to carry out dangerous siege work, the Mongols preserved their own soldiers for actual combat. The civilian casualties during these operations were catastrophic, but from the Mongol perspective, those were enemy casualties, not Mongol losses. A siege that might have cost the Mongols thousands of warriors instead cost them hundreds while killing thousands of civilians in the process.
One of Genghis Khan's most remarkable qualities was his adaptability. As the Mongols encountered new challenges and enemies, they quickly learned and incorporated new tactics and technologies. For example, when faced with fortified cities, they adopted and improved upon siege warfare techniques learned from conquered peoples. They became adept at using catapults, battering rams, and other siege engines, often employing captured engineers to operate these devices.
The Mongols learned to begin their attack with a long-range hail of arrows, crippling resistance before the cavalry began their assault.
One of their most devastatingly effective battlefield tactics was the so-called feigned retreat, in which Mongol riders would pretend to break formation and flee the field in apparent panic, luring overconfident enemy cavalry to chase them out of their defensive lines, only to suddenly wheel back around in perfect coordination and surround the now scattered enemy completely from every direction at once. Mongol commanders also relied heavily on a tactic known as the tulukhma, or standard sweep, in which separate columns of cavalry would advance across a wide front, appearing to enemy scouts as scattered, disorganized raiding parties, only to converge with devastating precision at a single predetermined point on the battlefield, catching defenders completely off guard.
The Mongol army also displayed remarkable endurance and self-sufficiency.
Mongol warriors ate a diet that horrified foreign observers. The staple was airag, fermented mare's milk, which provided calories, vitamins, and slight alcohol content that helped preserve it during long journeys, supplemented by dried meat and curd. During forced marches, warriors would sometimes cut their horses' necks and drink small amounts of blood mixed with milk, getting nutrition without slaughtering the animals they depended on for transportation.
This allowed them to travel light and fast, covering vast distances without the need for supply lines. The combined resources, manpower, and military expertise of the unified Mongols would soon be directed outward, setting the stage for conquests that would reshape the world. The invasion of the Western Xia. The invasion of Western Xia presented unique challenges for the Mongol army. The Tanguts relied on a network of fortified cities and complex irrigation systems. One of the most significant battles of the campaign took place at the Tangut capital of Yinchuan. The city's strong walls and its imposed a formidable challenge. In a display of tactical ingenuity, Genghis Khan ordered his troops to divert the nearby Huanghe, or Yellow River, flooding the city and forcing its surrender. The conquest of Western Xia provided the Mongols with access to vital trade routes, including parts of the Silk Road. This not only enriched the empire through trade, but also opened up new avenues for future expansion.
Genghis Khan turned his formidable army toward the Jin dynasty, which ruled over northern China and commanded a population numbering in the tens of millions, vastly outnumbering the Mongols by every possible measure.
For Genghis Khan, conquering the Jin wasn't just about territorial gain. It was a strategic necessity to secure the Mongol Empire's southern borders and gain access to Chinese wealth and agricultural production.
The problem facing the invaders was straightforward but serious. Mongols were unmatched on open ground, true masters of mounted archery and rapid maneuver, but they had absolutely no experience breaching the massive fortified cities that dotted the Chinese landscape. So they adapted quickly. They captured skilled Chinese engineers and forced them, under threat of death, to teach the secrets of siege warfare, including the construction and operation of catapults, battering rams, and complex techniques of city encirclement.
As the campaign progressed, the Mongols systematically conquered Jin territories, capturing major cities and strategic points.
Their battlefield tactics soon turned genuinely horrifying by any standard.
The fall of the Jin capital, Zhengdu, modern-day Beijing, marked a significant turning point in the conflict.
The city finally fell in June 1215, and what followed was one of the most brutal sacks in Chinese history. For 1 month, Mongol troops thoroughly looted, raped, and killed. Every building of value was stripped of treasures. The imperial palace was burned. Officials and aristocrats were executed, often after torture to reveal hidden wealth. Common citizens were slaughtered by the thousands. Historical accounts claim the city burned for more than a month, and the stench of rotting corpses could be smelled for miles.
Although the Jin emperor managed to escape and establish a new capital further south, the loss of their northern stronghold dealt a devastating blow to Jin power and morale. The conquest of the Jin dynasty had far-reaching impacts on Mongol expansion. This acquisition not only expanded the empire's resources, but also gave them access to advanced Chinese technologies and skilled workers.
Persia, vast and glittering, lies at the heart of the Islamic world. Caravan routes stretch across deserts and mountains, carrying silks from China, spices from India, and precious manuscripts written by scholars in Baghdad and Nishapur. At its center stands the Khwarezmian Empire.
The Khwarezm Empire stood as a formidable power, controlling vast territories stretching from modern-day Iran to Central Asia. In 1218, Genghis Khan dispatched a large caravan of merchants and envoys to the Khwarezm Empire, aiming to open diplomatic channels and secure trade agreements. This gesture, however, was met with suspicion and hostility. The governor of Otrar, a frontier city of the Khwarezm Empire, accused the Mongol emissaries of being spies and ordered their execution. This grave miscalculation would prove to be the catalyst for one of the most devastating military campaigns in history. Upon learning of the massacre of his envoys, Genghis Khan was enraged. He meticulously prepared for what would become a swift and brutal invasion of the Khwarezm Empire. The Mongol invasion began in 1219, with a massive force of approximately 200,000 warriors. Genghis Khan employed his trademark strategy of rapid cavalry movements, allowing his forces to cover vast distances and strike with unparalleled speed. The Khwarezm Empire, despite its size and wealth, was ill-prepared for the Mongol onslaught. The Mongols employed a brilliant strategy of dividing their forces to simultaneously attack multiple Khwarezm cities. This approach overwhelmed the empire's defensive network, preventing them from concentrating their forces effectively.
The first major city to fall was Bukhara, one of the greatest centers of Islamic learning in the world, home to over 50,000 people and defended by a garrison of 20,000 troops. Mongol forces arrived in February 1220, and the siege began with a terrifying display of power. Mongol trebuchets and catapults, operated by captured Chinese engineers, bombarded the walls day and night. Incendiary projectiles set fire to buildings inside the city. The garrison, seeing the hopelessness of their situation, attempted a desperate sortie to break through the Mongol lines.
The Khwarezmian cavalry rode out to meet the Mongols. Alongside them were war elephants, clad in armor, tusks gleaming with steel tips. At first it seemed the Mongols broke. Their riders scattered. The defenders gave chase, believing victory within their grasp, but the Mongols were drawing them away from the castle walls. Once out of the range of the archers on the castle walls, the Mongols turned around and charged. The Mongols gained the advantage and began to cut off the Khwarezmian cavalry. From the walls, the people of Samarkand watched their last hope vanish into dust and blood.
The Mongol cavalry surrounded them and methodically killed every soldier, leaving their bodies in heaps outside the city walls as a message to the defenders. The civilian population opened the gates and surrendered, hoping for mercy. They received none. Mongol troops entered Bukhara and began a systematic looting that lasted days. Every building of value was stripped. Every member of the garrison who had survived the earlier sortie was executed. Skilled craftsmen, metalworkers, engineers, Archers who could teach Mongol techniques were enslaved and sent east. Young women were distributed among the Mongol troops. The remaining population was enslaved or pressed into service as human shields for the next siege.
The Siege of Samarkand. Samarkand was a city of legend. For centuries, it had been a crucial hub along the Silk Road, where merchants from east and west converged to trade goods and ideas. The city's strategic location and immense wealth made it a prime target for Genghis Khan's expanding empire. The Mongol army arrived at Samarkand in 1220, fresh from their victories across Central Asia.
The siege of Samarkand demonstrated how completely the Mongols had mastered siege warfare. They constructed siege engines on a scale never before seen, with dozens of trebuchets hurling 600-pound stones at the walls from ranges of over 1,000 feet. They used captured population from previous conquests as human shields, driving terrified civilians ahead of assault columns. They employed Chinese gunpowder weapons, including early rockets that terrified defenders and set buildings ablaze. They mined under the walls, collapsing sections and creating breaches that were immediately exploited by assault troops. Despite the garrison's size and the city's formidable defences, Samarkand fell in just 5 days. The garrison attempted to negotiate a surrender, offering to spare the city if they were allowed to leave with their lives. The Mongols agreed, then proceeded to methodically execute the entire garrison once they had surrendered their weapons and marched outside the walls. This was standard Mongol practice. Promises made during sieges were not binding once the city fell.
For Genghis Khan, the capture of Samarkand was more than just another conquest. It provided the Mongols with vast riches, including gold, silk, and precious stones. More importantly, it gave them control over a key node in the Silk Road network, allowing them to regulate and profit from trade between East and West. As the Mongols advanced, the Khwarezm Shah Muhammad II fled westward, abandoning his people and army. This act of cowardice further demoralized the Khwarezm forces and led to the rapid collapse of organized resistance. Genghis Khan, determined to make an example of the Shah, pursued him relentlessly across the empire. Although Muhammad II ultimately escaped to a small island in the Caspian Sea where he died in exile, his flight marked the effective end of the Khwarezm Empire.
Its major cities lay in ruins. Its population had been reduced by millions. The Khwarezmian Empire, which had been one of the most prosperous and cultured regions in the world, was transformed into a wasteland.
Central Asia, a vast region stretching from the Caspian Sea to the borders of China, was a land of immense strategic importance. Genghis Khan recognized the potential of this region. By securing Central Asia, he could not only expand his empire, but also gain control over lucrative trade routes. The fabled Silk Road connecting East and West ran through its bustling cities and across its windswept steppes. This made Central Asia not just a valuable conquest, but a key to controlling the flow of goods and ideas across the known world. The Mongol military machine, honed by years of conquest, was well suited to the challenges of Central Asian warfare. Their highly mobile cavalry units could cover vast distances quickly, allowing them to outmaneuver their opponents. This mobility was crucial in a region where settlements were often separated by large stretches of desert or mountains. Psychological warfare, the hallmark of Mongol tactics, played a significant role in their Central Asian campaign. The reputation of Mongol ferocity preceded them, often causing cities to surrender without a fight. The conquest of Central Asia marked a turning point for the Mongol Empire. It transformed them from a formidable military force into a truly intercontinental power. Control over the Silk Road and other trade routes allowed the Mongols to profit from and regulate commerce between East and West. This economic power would fuel further expansion and consolidate their hold over their vast territories. The Mongols soon faced a new challenge in Eastern Europe. At the Battle of Kelka River in 1223, Genghis Khan's generals encountered a formidable alliance of Rus princes and Cuman warriors. The Mongol army, led by generals Jebe and Subutai, employed a tactic that had served them well in previous engagements: the feigned retreat. This strategy involved deliberately withdrawing from the battlefield, luring the enemy into a false sense of security and breaking their formation. Rus and Cuman forces, eager for victory, took the bait. As the Allied forces pursued what they believed to be a retreating enemy, they became stretched out and disorganized. The Mongols, meanwhile, maintained their discipline and coordination. When the moment was right, they suddenly turned and launched a devastating counterattack, encircling their opponents and cutting off any chance of escape. As the dust settled on the Mongol victory at Kalka River, Genghis Khan's ambitions grew ever larger. His eyes turned to a land of ancient empires and unimaginable wealth: Persia. Persia, modern-day Iran, was no easy target. Its history stretched back millennia, boasting a legacy of powerful empires and advanced civilization. The Persian military, hardened by centuries of conflict, was a force to be reckoned with. Yet for Genghis Khan, the potential rewards far outweighed the risks. The Mongol strategy for conquering Persia was a masterclass in military efficiency. Rather than concentrating their forces for a single massive assault, Genghis Khan divided his army into smaller, highly mobile units. These groups would strike simultaneously at multiple targets across the Persian Empire, preventing any coordinated defense. This tactic of dividing to conquer proved devastatingly effective. Persian cities found themselves isolated, unable to call for reinforcements or organize a united front against the Mongol onslaught. The speed and ferocity of these attacks often left defenders shell-shocked, further eroding their will to resist. This encouraged many Persian leaders to submit without a fight, preserving their lives and prosperity in exchange for Mongol rule.
The city of Nishapur would become synonymous with Mongol terror. In November 1220, during the siege of the city, Genghis Khan's son-in-law Tokuchar, husband of his daughter Toks, was killed by an arrow fired from the city walls. The Khan's daughter demanded vengeance in a form so absolute that history would never forget. When Nishapur finally fell in April 1221, the Mongols carried out what may be the most thorough massacre in human history. Nearly every living thing in the city was killed. Men, women, children, infants. None were spared. Even animals were slaughtered. Everything that moved was killed. The city's population, estimated by some accounts at 100,000 to 200,000, was methodically executed over several days. The ground was ploughed over. The irrigation canals were destroyed. The walls were demolished stone by stone. Nishapur wasn't just conquered, it was erased.
One of the most significant aspects of the Mongol conquest of Persia was its impact on the Silk Road. This ancient network of trade routes had long been a source of wealth and cultural exchange between East and West. Under Mongol control, the Silk Road entered a new era of security and efficiency. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongol Peace, allowed merchants to travel vast distances without fear of bandits or local warlords. Administration and governance of the Mongol Empire. The key to Mongol governance lay in its flexibility. Genghis Khan adopted a decentralized approach, allowing local leaders to maintain a degree of autonomy as long as they pledged loyalty and paid tribute to the Mongols. This strategy helped to minimize resistance and maintain stability across the empire. Local customs and traditions were often respected, reducing the likelihood of uprisings and fostering a sense of continuity for conquered peoples. Religious tolerance was another cornerstone of Mongol administration. Genghis Khan recognized that attempting to impose a single faith across such a diverse empire would likely lead to conflict and instability. Instead, he adopted a policy of religious freedom, allowing conquered peoples to maintain their beliefs and practices. This approach helped to maintain peace and stability, reducing the likelihood of religiously motivated uprisings.
Trade and merit were elevated above bloodline at every level of this new society. A level of social mobility almost unimaginable anywhere else in the 13th century world, where birth alone typically determined a person's entire destiny from the moment they were born.
The death of Genghis Khan and the succession struggles. Genghis Khan's final campaign was against the Western Xia, a kingdom he had previously conquered, but which had rebelled against Mongol rule. During this campaign, he fell ill and died in August 1227. The exact circumstances of his death remain a mystery, as his followers took extraordinary measures to keep it secret.
Legend says that when he died, his funeral escorts slaughtered everyone they passed, erasing all witnesses to his burial. Thousands of slaves built his tomb only to be executed. Then the soldiers who killed them were executed too. The result? Not a single living soul knew the location.
To this very day, despite extensive modern searches using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, the tomb of Genghis Khan has never once been found.
As Genghis Khan's life came to an end, a new chapter in Mongol history was about to unfold. The Great Khan's death set in motion a series of events that would test the very foundations of the empire he had built. Genghis Khan had appointed his third son, Ogedei, as his successor and overall ruler of the empire. Despite Genghis Khan's clear instructions, rivalries between different factions threatened to tear the empire apart. It took 2 years after Genghis Khan's death for the succession to be finalized. In 1229, at a great assembly known as the Kurultai, Ogedei was officially proclaimed as the new Great Khan. Ogedei Khan faced the daunting task of maintaining unity across the vast Mongol territories. Ogedei's challenge was to keep this massive realm together while continuing the expansion that had defined his father's rule.
Ogedei Khan went on to build the Mongols' very first permanent capital city, named Karakorum, a remarkable transformation that turned a once purely nomadic empire into something possessing real administrative structure and a fixed, stable seat of central power for the very first time in its history. He then dispatched his single most brilliant military commander, the legendary General Subutai, to lead an enormous invasion force deep into the territories of Russia and onward into the heart of Europe itself, launching a campaign that would soon terrify 2 entire continents simultaneously. The Mongols turned the brutal European winter into a decisive military advantage that few local armies had ever previously considered exploiting. They used the frozen, ice-covered rivers of Russia as natural highways, allowing their fast-moving cavalry to strike unsuspecting cities at incredible speed across terrain that would have been completely impassable swampland during any other season of the year. The great city of Kiev was burned entirely to the ground in the year 1240, following a brutal and prolonged siege involving massed catapults and devastating incendiary weapons. The triumphant Mongol army then pushed steadily forward into Poland and Hungary, annihilating tens of thousands of assembled European knights and soldiers at the decisive battles of Legnica and Mohi within the very same year. The Battle of Legnica, fought in Poland, saw a combined force of Polish knights, German Templars, and Teutonic Order soldiers utterly destroyed by a Mongol army roughly equal in size, but vastly superior in coordination and tactical flexibility. European heavy cavalry, slow and rigid in their formations, proved almost helpless against an enemy that could fire arrows at a full gallop while retreating, then wheel back for a devastating counterattack within minutes. Just 2 days later, hundreds of kilometers away, at the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, an even larger European force suffered an equally catastrophic defeat. King Bela IV barely escaped with his life, as his entire army was encircled and slaughtered. General Subutai himself remains one of the most underappreciated military commanders in world history. Born a commoner, the son of a blacksmith, he rose entirely on merit to become arguably the single most successful field commander of the entire Mongol conquest, personally overseeing campaigns that conquered more territory than any other general in human history, stretching from Korea in the Far East to the gates of Vienna in the heart of Europe, a record that remains unmatched even to this day. By the very end of the year 1241, advancing Mongol cavalry units had already reached the immediate outskirts of Vienna itself. All of Western Europe stood frozen in paralyzing fear, with seemingly no remaining military force anywhere on the continent capable of meaningfully stopping the relentless advance. Europe genuinely seemed to be facing total, unstoppable catastrophe within a matter of mere weeks. And then, almost unbelievably, a single messenger arrived from the distant east. Word finally reached General Subutai's command tent that Great Khan Ogadai had suddenly died back in Mongolia. Under the strict, unbending laws of the Yasa, every single commander and royal relative throughout the entire empire was legally required to immediately abandon any ongoing campaign and return at once to the capital in order to personally participate in the Kurultai and help select a worthy new Great Khan. This sudden, almost miraculous withdrawal of Mongol forces from the gates of Vienna ultimately saved the whole of Western Europe from what would very likely have been complete and total devastation. In the year 1251, Mongke was formally elected as the new Great Khan, following a fiercely contested Kurultai. Mongke quickly proved himself to be an exceptionally ruthless and decisive ruler in every respect. He carried out a sweeping and brutal purge of his political rivals across the empire, executing numerous high-ranking nobles in order to firmly secure his own grip on power and eliminate any future potential challenge to his throne before it could even form. He then devised an entirely new and ambitious strategic vision for the next phase of conquest, deliberately splitting future military campaigns into two separate fronts. His brother, Hulagu, was sent westward to conquer the heart of the Middle East, while his other brother, Kublai, was simultaneously tasked with completing the long-delayed conquest of southern China.
For 5 centuries, Baghdad had been a centre of learning, culture and commerce. The city was home to over 1 million people and was protected by substantial walls and a garrison of tens of thousands. The Mongol army arrived at Baghdad in January 1258. Hulagu's forces surrounded the city completely, cutting off all escape routes.
Around January 29, the bombardment began. Stones struck towers and battlements with a rhythm that continued for hours.
A sortie of 20,000 men attempted to break through the Mongol lines. Hulagu's engineers breached the Tigris River dikes, flooding the plain and drowning the Iraqi troops in their own defensive positions. On February 10, 1258, Baghdad surrendered. 3 days later, the Mongol army entered the city and began a systematic sack that lasted 2 weeks. What happened next remains one of the darkest episodes in human history. The soldiers of the garrison were separated from civilians and executed en masse. Thousands were herded outside the walls and methodically killed. The Mongols went, street by street, house by house, killing everyone they found. Estimates of the death toll range from 200,000 to over 1 million.
The legendary House of Wisdom, a vast and irreplaceable library containing many centuries' worth of accumulated scientific and philosophical knowledge, was burned completely to the ground in the chaos. Tens of thousands of priceless books and manuscripts were thrown directly into the Tigris River, and witnesses at the time claimed the river's water ran visibly black with ink for many days afterward.
Caliph al-Mustasim himself was executed in a manner that reflected Mongol customs regarding noble blood. He was rolled in a carpet and trampled to death by horses.
For more than 5 centuries, Baghdad had stood as the unrivaled center of the Abbasid Caliphate. Its destruction represented not merely a military defeat, but the violent end of an entire golden age of scholarship that the region never fully recovered from. As Hulagu Khan busily prepared his very next major campaign, an ambitious invasion of Egypt itself, news suddenly arrived that Great Khan Monka had died unexpectedly during an entirely separate military campaign. Just as had happened once before, back in 1241, Hulagu was now forced to withdraw the overwhelming majority of his army back toward Mongolia to participate in the succession process. As the once unified Mongol Empire gradually began fracturing into 4 largely independent khanates, Kublai Khan formally declared himself the new Great Khan, and turned his complete and undivided attention toward finally finishing the long-delayed conquest of all of China. The ongoing war against the southern Song dynasty proved to be exceptionally difficult and frustrating for the Mongols.
This was no walk in the park. The southern Song was rich, technologically advanced, and had a population of tens of millions. For decades, they had successfully fought off Mongol attacks. The final conquest was a long, grueling war that dragged on for over a decade. The main event was the incredible siege of the twin cities of Xiangyang and Fancheng. For 5 straight years, from 1268 to 1273, the Mongols laid siege to this fortress, which was the gateway to the wealthy Yangtze River basin. This battle was a showcase of medieval military tech. When Xiangyang finally fell in 1273, it was the beginning of the end for the Song. Kublai's armies flooded into the heart of southern China. In 1276, the capital city of Linan surrendered, and the child emperor was taken prisoner. The final, tragic act of the war happened at sea. At the Battle of Yamen in 1279, a massive Mongol fleet cornered the last of the Song navy. The battle was a slaughter. A top Song official, knowing it was all over, grabbed the 8-year-old emperor and jumped into the sea, choosing death over surrender. Just like that, the Song dynasty was gone. For the first time ever, all of China was under the rule of a foreign power.
Kublai Khan next set his ambitious sights on the island nation of Japan.
In 1274, he sent his first invasion fleet, about 900 ships packed with tens of thousands of Mongol, Chinese, and Korean troops. A sudden massive typhoon smashed into the fleet while it was anchored, forcing a humiliating retreat. Kublai didn't take failure well. He became obsessed. In 1281, he sent a second, even bigger force, one of the largest naval invasions in history, with over 4,000 ships and more than 100,000 men. A second, even more powerful typhoon slammed into the fleet and practically wiped it off the map. The Japanese believed these storms were sent by the gods to protect them. They named them kamikaze, or divine wind.
The financial and human cost of these 2 failed campaigns was staggering for the Yuan treasury.
The Mongols seemed to be reaching a natural limit of conquest. Expansion west into Africa was blocked by the Egyptian Mamluks. Expansion east into Japan saw the Mongol navy sink in 2 typhoons. Expansion north would be nothing but cold, harsh Siberian waste, and expansion south into Vietnam was repeatedly repelled, not to mention to cross into somewhere like India would require them to march through the Himalayas. Conquest was the lifeblood of the empire. It was a war-based society, but war was no longer beneficial. Kublai became grossly overweight in his old age and died in 1294. The Mongol Empire didn't exist. Instead, it was now just a loose connection between four khanates. The Yuan dynasty would pass from emperor to emperor up until in 1368 the Red Turban Rebellion saw the Yuan dynasty overthrown by the Chinese Ming. The remnants of the Yuan retreated to the Mongolian heartland. The Ilkhanate would convert to Islam and embrace Persian and Arabic culture. The Black Death, which ironically the Mongol Empire's trade and Eurasian connections most likely spread, saw the Khanate ravaged and disintegrate into many smaller states, which had very little to do with their Mongol roots. The Golden Horde also saw the influences of Islam and Christianity strip their identity, and they split into smaller khanates in the 15th century. Their former subjects in the Rus would create the Russian Empire, which would incorporate all these khanates by 1783. The Mongolia we see today is the result of the Northern Yuan dynasty falling apart into smaller khanates and being conquered by the Qing in the late 17th century. When the Qing fell in 1911, the powers that be in Outer Mongolia were heavily influenced by Russian and Chinese communists and became the Mongolian People's Republic across the 20th century. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the modern Mongol state was born.
The Mongol Empire had annihilated empires across Asia, Europe and the Middle East. From the Pacific Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea, from Siberia to India, no power had been able to withstand them. Millions were dead. Cities that had stood for centuries were erased. Entire civilizations were broken. What was the true cost of this conquest? What did Mongol warfare actually mean for the people who experienced it? That is where we turn next, to the brutal truth that history often sanitizes but must never forget. Let's start with the numbers, because they tell a story that human language struggles to capture. Conservative modern estimates suggest that the Mongol conquest resulted in the deaths of approximately 40 million people over the course of the 13th and early 14th centuries. To put that in perspective, the world population at the time was estimated at roughly 400 million. This represents approximately 10% of the global population, a demographic catastrophe on a scale rarely matched in human history. That's equivalent to 800 million deaths, in today's population terms, more than World War I and World War II combined, multiplied by 3. But those aggregate numbers hide regional catastrophes that were even more devastating. China's population, which stood at over 100 million in 1200 under the combined Song and Jin dynasties, had collapsed to approximately 60 million by 1393, after the Mongol Yuan dynasty had been expelled. That's a loss of 40 million people over 2 centuries of Mongol rule and warfare. The destruction in Persia and Central Asia was proportionally even worse. The Khwarezmian Empire had a population estimated at 15 to 20 million before the Mongol invasion. By 1260, after 4 decades of Mongol campaigns, conquests and misrule, the population had dropped to perhaps 5 to 7 million. That's a population loss of 70 to 75%. The scale of sexual violence during Mongol conquests was unprecedented and systematic. When a city fell, women and girls were specifically targeted. Young women were separated from the general population and distributed among the soldiers. Contemporary accounts describe markets where captured women were traded, sold, and distributed like goods.
Did you know one man may have more living descendants than anyone else in history? That man was Genghis Khan. In 2003, geneticists discovered that about 16 million men alive today, roughly 1 in every 200 men, share a remarkably similar Y chromosome. Since the Y chromosome passes almost unchanged from father to son, researchers traced this genetic signature back about 800 years to the region where Genghis Khan built the Mongol Empire. Genghis Khan had many wives and concubines, and his sons and grandsons followed the same pattern. This powerful ruling family produced thousands of descendants over the centuries. Generation after generation, that family tree kept growing until it reached millions. Scientists can't prove the DNA belonged to Genghis Khan with absolute certainty, but the evidence makes him the leading candidate.
The Mongols were among history's first military forces to deliberately weaponize infectious disease. The Mongols understood that disease could be as effective as arrows in reducing a city's population and breaking its will to resist.
One of the earliest recorded instances of biological warfare took place in 1346 during the siege of the Crimean city of Kaffa. The Mongol army was struck by an outbreak of the bubonic plague. Rather than retreat, the Mongols decided to use their misfortune as a weapon. The Mongols catapulted the bodies of their soldiers who had died from the plague over the walls of Kaffa. The intention was to infect the city's population. The tactic proved devastating. This event not only altered the course of the conflict in Kaffa, but also had far-reaching consequences, as it may have played a role in bringing the Black Death to Europe.
The Mongol conquest didn't just kill people, they destroyed entire ecosystems and agricultural systems, causing environmental damage that persisted for centuries. The most devastating environmental impact occurred in Persia and Mesopotamia, where civilization had depended on sophisticated irrigation systems for thousands of years. The Mongols deliberately destroyed these systems. During the conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire, Mongol forces demolished Khanat's underground irrigation channels that brought water from mountain sources to agricultural regions. Without these Khanats, farmland that had been productive for millennia turned to desert within a generation. The destruction of the Khanat system in Khorasan turned one of the most prosperous agricultural regions in the medieval world into a wasteland. Agricultural productivity had declined catastrophically and wouldn't recover until modern times. This wasn't just the result of depopulation. It was deliberate destruction of the infrastructure that made agriculture possible. The destruction extended to forests and wildlife. The Mongols practiced scorched earth tactics extensively, burning forests to deny cover to enemy forces, destroying orchards to eliminate food sources. The environmental damage compounded the human casualties, ensuring that even survivors of the initial conquests faced famine, displacement, and long-term economic collapse. The Mongol approach to cities was unique in military history. Most conquerors throughout history sought to capture cities intact because cities represented wealth, power, and administrative centers. The Mongols often chose to destroy cities completely, erasing them so thoroughly that in some cases their exact locations were lost to history. This wasn't random vandalism. It was calculated policy designed to break the power of sedentary civilizations and ensure that conquered territories couldn't organize effective resistance. After the population was dealt with, the city's infrastructure would be systematically demolished. Walls were knocked down stone by stone, both to prevent the city from being used as a defensive position by future enemies and to send a message to other cities about the cost of resistance. The Mongol conquests show us humanity at its most ruthlessly efficient and most horrifically brutal. They show us what happens when martial excellence and strategic brilliance are combined with absolute moral indifference. That's the brutal truth.